Hey, what's up, Good Life? Thanks for joining me for today's 128 moment. You know, I think in times like these troubling times, I believe we all just want to know that there's a safe place in the storm. Thankfully, over and over in Scripture, we hear statements like in Psalm 18, where David reminds us that the Lord is my rock in whom I take refuge. It's a beautiful promise, but it comes with a problem. We often misunderstand the refuge that God provides. We think and are often told by some people that following God means freedom from trouble. So when life hurts, we doubt God. And we wonder why the Bible calls God our refuge when life feels like this. Well, to answer that question, let me tell you a story. It's a story we've shared before, but it bears repeating in times like these. It's a story that starts with the truth, that life is never easy and it's not always safe, especially when the winds and the waves of life are washing over us. In 2013, there was a tugboat off the coast of Nigeria right by a Chevron oil platform that ran into a storm. The Atlantic Ocean can be rough 20 miles out, and in the darkness of the early morning hours, the large tugboat capsized and it sank, carrying all of her 12 crew to the bottom. 3 days later, deep-sea scuba divers were going through the wreck to recover bodies of the crew, and that far down, 110 feet down, you can't be down there very long without diving on a special mix of air. And it makes you sound a little bit like you're inhaling from a helium balloon. What you're about to see is the footage that the divers saw when they were doing that search and recovery.
All right, how are you doing, Nico? Just talk to me and I'll help you, eh? Okay, so have you come into the next deck? Onto the main deck? All right, so you should be walking on the ceiling, yeah? Okay. What's that? Oh, okay. All right, you found one, yeah? He's alive, he's alive. Okay, keep him there, keep him there. All right, just, all right, just hold him there, okay? Just keep him there. I don't know what we're going to do. All right, just keep him there and keep him calm, okay? All right, just reassure him, pat him on the shoulder. Okay. All right. All right. Okay, just reassure him, give him a thumbs up and reassure him.
Now, the diver found Harrison Okine, the ship cook, and against all odds, he was alive. But how? At 4:30 in the morning, he'd gotten up to start his day, and he stopped at the bathroom for a moment as the ship was beginning to sink. And he stepped out into the dark hallway. He tried to make his way to a hatch, but in that moment, he saw 3 of his crewmates washed away by the rushing water. But that same rushing water swept him through the ship and into the officer's restroom. When the ship came to rest upside down on the ocean floor, that little bathroom gave him a 4-foot-high air bubble that became his home. For 3 days, he's there in the frigid water. He had no food. He had no water to drink. He lived on a 2-liter bottle of Coca-Cola that floated in during the wreck. For 3 days, he's locked in the worst of circumstances. And he had every reason to wonder if God had forgotten about him. That little room was his torture chamber. It's cold and it's wet and it's pitch black. And the salt water is just peeling away at his skin. And if that wasn't enough, the fish had gotten into the ship and they'd started eating the bodies of his friends. Once he was rescued, Harrison was asked, how did he endure such an awful ordeal? And Harrison responded that I prayed about 100 times. When I was tired, I started calling on the name of the Lord. It was just calling on his name for divine intervention. And I started reminiscing on the verses that I'd read from the Psalms before I went to bed. Verses like this: the Lord is my strength, my fortress and my deliverer. He is my rock in whom I take refuge, my shield and the horn of my salvation. And no matter what, I will call upon the Lord, who's worthy to be praised. For Harrison Okine, the refuge the Lord provided, as painful as it was better than the crushing and suffocating darkness of the ocean floor. As miserable as his circumstances were, God provided him a safe place from a storm that should have killed him. In the midst of his misery, Harrison remembered that God was his refuge from worse. Same is true for us. we don't always like, let alone understand our circumstances. And we may even wonder if God's abandoned us, but we can't truly evaluate our circumstances until we compare them to the storm raging outside of God's refuge. Harrison Okine was in one of the worst possible places we could imagine, and yet it was infinitely better than the certain death waiting right outside. And the refuge we have in God may not look all that safe to us, and it may not be what we'd sign up for until we compare it to the storm outside, until we compare it what it would be like to go through the storm without the refuge of our God. So Good Life, my encouragement to you is this: rest in His presence. Trust in His provision. Let Him be your refuge until the storm passes. Good Life, I love you guys and I miss you. I'm looking forward to being able to see you at some point. Hopefully you'll be able to join us online on Sunday morning at 9 o'clock for our kids service and at 9:30 for our online worship service. And if I don't see you then, hopefully we'll see you tomorrow at 1:28.